Welcome! Today you're going to learn how to do a painting with reflections. The first thing I do is make a little black and white sketch, and I put in the masses of darks. Using the photograph, I look for the big mass of dark on the left and then the one on the right. It's easier to use a black and white photo to help you see the darks and the lights. Can you spot the big dark mass on the left and on the right? Spend time drawing the ducks. It's worth your while to even research if you need to get a better picture of them. You can find nice pictures of ducks if you just go Google them. I Googled Rouen ducks from France. That's how I found this picture. Here I have a sea sponge. I'm going to use this to wet the paper. Make sure it's clean. This I kind of left green in it, but it's working. I'm just spreading it around. And now I'm using my round brush. It's a Loew Cornell number 12. I'm starting with a mix of Cobalt Blue. Referring to your little black and white sketch, you're going to fill in all the areas that are not white, just like a sketch, but with blue paint. Now remember, the paper is wet, so I'm applying the blue paint and it's having a nice soft effect. If you're not getting that soft effect, you might want to re-wet the paper and start again. As you can see, I'm using the brush kind of like you would use a pencil, and I'm holding the end of the brush. In order to make it darker in the two big mass areas on the left and right, I'm going straight into my pigment, very little water, and adding that to make it darker. Sometimes I get a little lost trying to figure out where I'm at. But it doesn't really matter at this stage if you go outside the lines or you go a little too far. Just make sure you don't cover up the light area around the ducks. You reserve that for your focal point. Here I'm wiping up some paint with a thirsty brush. I'm cleaning it and absorbing it on the paper towel and softening some of the edges at the bottom. If you get any really sharp edges in the water, you can soften them that way. Alright, so with a thirsty brush, I am pulling out and reshaping the tree. As you can see, I'm cleaning my brush, wiping it on a paper towel, and then just really pushing down and sucking up so that I can reshape the edge of that tree. That's the wonderful thing about Cobalt Blue. You can erase it with your paintbrush. You can kind of see now the development of the darks versus the lights if you compare the black and white photograph to my painting. And I'm just going to keep trying to squint and compare the two until I get something that's similar. You don't have to go quite as dark as the photograph. I generally don't like to make my paintings as dark as the photographs, but I do keep my values in the same order: the dark, the middle, and the light. And if I don't go as dark as those two masses, if I go lighter, then everything else has to be a little bit lighter too. It's going to be darker where the land is right above the water and where the water is right below the land. Here I'm going to mix a mixture of Aureolin Yellow and Opera Rose. I'm going to put in a little bit of sunsetty kind of color to the sky and just some warmth to add to the landscape. And this will be a nice contrast against the blue. A little bit of peach against the blue is a beautiful contrast. So just remember, this is the lightest part of your painting, so you don't want to go heavy. You want to keep it super light and just a kiss of color. Because this is light, we're working on dry paper. Okay, now would be a good time to add a little bit of rose to glaze over this light blue, just to make a lavender. I think that would be a nice complement to the sunset color. And I'm just going to put it at the bottom and at the top in the sky. As you can see, there's a reflected highlight on the right side of the painting at the horizon line. That's just light reflecting on the paper. That's not part of the painting. Here I'm adding a little bit of Cobalt Blue to accentuate the sun-kissed clouds. I realize I've made an outline around my cloud, so now I'm wiping it up with a thirsty brush. So now I'm ready to do the leaves and the trees, and I'm mixing Cobalt with Aureolin Yellow. And I'm having trouble getting it yellow enough. I'm going to test it there. I'll test with just a little dot to see. It wasn't quite right. I'm going to add more yellow. That's better. Here I'm using the side of the brush and drying it so that I can skip across the little bumps on the paper and create a leaf look. I decided I'm using a little bit of Quinacridone Gold just to give it a little more depth. I'm working on dry paper, and also you might have noticed I sped up the frames. So I'm not really actually working this fast. I'm adding a little bit of Quinacridone Burnt Orange. I'm mixing Ultramarine Blue with Quinacridone Gold. So putting in the darks, I'm feeling the need to soften it a little bit, so I'm pulling out with a thirsty clean brush some of the dark that I put in for a smoother transition. So I'm mixing Ultramarine Blue, Quinacridone Burnt Orange, Aureolin Yellow, and Quinacridone Gold back to our Ultramarine Blue. I'm trying to get a forest green, a deep, rich green. So my brush is pretty not dry, but in between wet and dry, and I'm just bouncing the paintbrush onto the paper and leaving underpainting showing through. That blue should be showing through in some places. Don't cover it up completely. It's kind of hard to see here with the reflection on the paper, but I'm using a little more yellow. A whole lot of that color. It's almost like a midnight green. So I'm just deepening the areas that are dark right near the water. Here I'm putting in the upper trees with a drier brush. I think my brush is a little wet still. We'll see when I put it in. I'm drying it off a little bit. So now I'm gonna put in this tree in sort of a up and down vertical dry brush. It has that feel. It's one of those trees with upward branches. Kind of a dry tree. Alright, now while the tree is still a little wet, I'm putting in some more darker areas, usually toward the center of the tree. I'm trying to put it everywhere I can find a place. So now I'm looking at that tree, the white tree in the middle, and it's not white, I have to cover it. So I'm going to test the yellow and see. It's a little too yellow, add a little blue to it. A little cobalt blue. So that's better. Now I lighten it a bit to dry off my brush, and I'm just going to, with a dry brush, go over that tree, leaving a little bit showing through. Not a lot, just a little bit. I'm using the side of my brush. And of course I'm not working that fast. I'm dropping in a little bit of shadowing. I dipped into my blue, a little bit more blue, and while it's wet you can pop in a little shadowing in the areas where you see. Try not to make a face. Whenever I see a face I start to change it up a little bit just to keep away from the face look. You don't want to go too dark here. If you go too dark, there's going to be too much contrast and it will be confusing, so you want to keep it fairly subtle. Just sucking up a little bit of that shape. Don't want the two eyes to be the same exact size. So that was kind of a grayish color going over that tree. Sucking up the bottom too. Now I've got a scrubby, and I'm going to scrub out that white trunk. I just switched my scrubby to a thinner one. Secret to a scrubby is to have a clean brush. Just scraping out some branches, lighter branches. Just a little bit goes a long way. Sometimes you have to go over it twice to get the white back. So back to my round brush. This is a smaller brush, the number 8. And because it's cobalt, I can pull that reflection from the tree right out of the water. It's got to be a clean, dry brush. You have to do it a few times. Getting ready to make the reflection color, so I'm going to switch to my big flat brush with an angle. I'm going to wet the water, all the reflected water area, a little beyond, so it has room to move. And I'm just wiping it slightly with a paper towel so it's not too wet. I'm trying my round brush, but I'm not liking it as much, so I'm switching to my flat brush. Just go straight down. Right up to the edge. You want to have plenty of this color mixed ahead of time so that you don't run out and have to mix, which I ran out and I'm going to have to mix. So that's Aureolin yellow for the middle. with a little bit of blue added to it. Just trying to avoid the highlight where the ducks are. Nice light area. Adding some of that yellow to the bottom of the reflection. And because my brush wasn't super wet, it's not blossoming and moving all over the paper. It pretty much stays where you want it to stay. Now I'm sucking up some of that color with my thirsty brush. Clean and thirsty, just making the edges a little bit softer. I need more darks in my reflections, so I'm going to use ultramarine blue, quinacridone burnt orange, Aureolin yellow. Still wet, so I can still move in that area without too much trouble. If it's dry, you want to stop and wait until it's completely dry and then re-wet it and start the process again. You could do this in several layers, as many layers as you want, but it's best to do it in as little layers as possible. It makes for a fresher watercolor. So this loose technique with the brush is just to turn it, twist it, bounce it on the paper, get that impression of leaves instead of painting each leaf with a pointy brush. Maybe a little bit of dark in that area, right near the ducks. I'm not sure why I'm doing that, I just like it. Sometimes, you know, you can veer from the photograph, you don't have to adhere to it. I'm liking it. I think I'll keep going. Now we're going to do the ducks. We want to keep the ducks nice and bright. They're going to be the focal point. So I dried the ferrule of the brush so as not to get too much water on the duck as I'm working. So I decided to do a male duck and a female duck. In the photograph they're both female, I believe, and they're ducks from France. And so I researched them, and these are the ducks that I found that I wanted to do. So I thought I'd put the male in front and as the leader, and then I'm going to do the female behind. So I'm using sort of a grayish, whatever's in my palette, a little grayish color to start with. I fill in the bird and then I pull out the middle of the body a little bit. Keeping the exterior contour darker. I'm dropping in a little bit of dry brush dark. If my brush were too wet, it would go all over and fill the bird completely, but I'm sticking to a very dry brush because the bird is already wet. With the birds, I like to be, since they're the focal point, I want them to be more finished. Everything else can be loose, but the birds, because they're in the foreground, have to be finished. So I'm switching to a fine brush, very fine brush. And I dry it off a little bit, and then that's how I'm going to put the beak in. So some Gamboge Yellow. The male duck's beaks are more yellow and the females are more orange. You can exaggerate this if you want. Now some Thalo Green I'm filling in his body. It's a little drier now so I can fill it in. Nice pure color in there. Looks so nice, that Thalo Green. I just love it. You have to use it very watery though to get that look. So this is Gamboge, and it's mixed with some stuff in my palette, so it's warmish yellow. Then I'm going to use that straight Quinacridone burnt orange to give it sort of a glow of orange. Now here's some Naphthol red mixed with Gamboge, a little bit of Aureolin. Just going to pop that beak in. It's not as orange. There we go. Wasn't as orange as I thought it was going to be. We could make it bright orange. Now along the contour, as the bird is wet, I'm just dropping in some super dark on a dry brush. It has to be a dry brush, otherwise it would completely overtake the bird. Just going around the exterior of the bird, putting his eyes. The female has little stripes that come from the eye. The male is more like, looks like a mallard. It's got a sort of a aqua head and gray feathers. I'm kind of inventing my own colors here. You can do the same. You could make two female birds. Whatever you want. You can even do little babies. Just popping in some bright colors. Okay, time to clean the palette up a little bit with my sea sponge and my table and change the water. Wow, that was fast. Okay, so I'm going for my number 8 brush, round, to begin to the cobalt, and I'm going to start to make the ripples. Just pure cobalt blue. And when you're making ripples, you want to make sure that you don't have everything symmetrical. It might help you to draw the ripples first, whatever, or practice beforehand. It's a wonderful pattern, but it's not symmetrical, so thin, thick, large, small, and they're all kind of going in an elliptical pattern, similar to the shapes of the birds. I'm kind of inventing my ripples. I'm not copying the photograph exactly. I'm just using it sort of as a guide. A little darker where the birds are, and it'll lighten as you come out away from them. That isn't always the case with ripples. Every river and lake or body of water is going to be different. And I'm just going very slow and trying to figure out where it would be prettiest. Not so much reality, but what would make for a better looking pattern and placement. Now as they come toward you, they get a little thicker, a little longer. As they recede and go into the distance, they get smaller and shorter. Just putting some really, and lighter, putting some real light ones in the background. And they're kind of looking, I like them. They're looking good. Doesn't always work out that way when you freehand it. So I'm not too displeased. And I'm going to go in with straight cobalt blue, thicker and darker toward the bottom. I'm seeing that in the water. You'll see that in the photograph in the bottom left. Sort of gave me that idea. And as I go to the edge of the paper, I want to make sure that it's not, I'm not leading the viewer out, so I close up the whites of the edge there, just so I'm not leading the viewer out of the picture. Standing back and looking. Always good at this point to stand back, because you can really take it too far. Now I'm doing the foreground ripples. They're lighter. I don't want to draw attention to the foreground too much. The focus really needs to stay with the birds. This entire painting is a balancing act of not getting too crazy in the other areas so the birds really pop and stand out. I think that's my biggest challenge, letting the focal point be the focal point. I like to finish everything, so it's really hard to pull back and not finish, not do all the detail. So I'm getting a little darker. I'll put the darks in the birds. At this point, I think I went too far with the darks, and later on, and you'll see in the painting, I had to rub out the birds with a Scrubbie and start again. You can do that, but if you probably the best thing would be for you not to go too dark, to go light, and then at the very end, if you feel it needs to be darker, go darker. I just fell so in love with these birds, I just couldn't leave them alone. So that is the challenge. If I could have just stopped right here, I think that would have been the best, but no, I couldn't stop. Should be a lesson to you. Quit while you're ahead. Look at that dark going in there. Oh. Now, it wouldn't have been horrible, but I really wanted the birds to be more colorful and to be pop more. So that's why I redid them. Now I'm adding a little bit more darkness to the ripples that are closest to the birds. I've added a little bit of brown to the blue, and then I'm adding the color of the birds into the reflection as well, into the ripple as well. Popped in some green, pure green. Just let it do its thing. Pop in some rust color there. See how they're really starting to stand out and be the focal? Now I'm going back in. I need to finish this bush. It's looking a little flat, so I'm taking a very slight light color all around the edges, trying to make it look a little more three-dimensional. So if you blew up the edges, in other words, you put a little bit of gray-blue around the edges, it should make it look like it's turning the corner like three-dimensional. That net's all red. Just want to pop that into the puddle ripple. Look at that. Ooh, that looks so good. Love that. I'm really liking that. Constantly when I'm doing paintings, my eye is going all over the place. I never really forget one area. I'm always moving my eye around the picture. I like to work the whole picture, not one area at one time, finish and then go to the next. I'm quickly putting in the tree trunks and branches with a ultramarine and quinacridone burnt orange wash. Here I'm going to use the Scrubbie to pull out the reflection of a white trunk. To clean, wet Scrubbie, and then I swipe it with a paper towel. You might have to do that twice. I'm going to switch the Scrubbie to a much thinner one, and now I'm going to pull out a reflection. So in a horizontal direction, I'm just taking the Scrubbie, rinsing it, and then doing it again. Very lightly scrubbing. Trying to keep it really thin. Don't do a thick line, because in the distance it would be a very thin line. Now take the wipe. There, look at that. Ooh, nice. Now one further away. They can't be the same length or not an even distance apart either. Here I'm going to take a little bit into the green reflection so it doesn't look cut off. If I stopped at the blue, it wouldn't look right, so I had to take it all the way across the green. I'm adding a little bit more to the edge of this bush, just this tree, to make it look like a little more three-dimensional. I am leaving a lot of underpainting popping through in the center. You can see there's a lot of variation in value, but not drastic. Okay, so I wiped my birds out. You can see they're wiped out. And now I'm just popping pure, beautiful color. You can see the difference here between the one on the left is the earlier one, and the one on the right is the finished look of the second application. So just trying to be more pure with my color. So I'll lay that in, let it dry, and then I'll pop in the little brown speckles on the top. I don't believe I show you how I do that because I've already showed you how to paint the birds. Just showing you that it's possible if you make a boo-boo that you can correct it. That's always a good thing. And I'm feeling like I need to bring that tree out a little bit more by putting it a little bit darker behind it. That white tree in the front, if I darken behind it, it will make it pop forward a little bit more. That tree needs a little bit of darkening too. Not too much, just enough. I'm going to turn it upside down. So the reason I turn the painting upside down and the photograph is so that I can see if I've missed any areas, if my values are all in the right place, if there's anything unbalanced or imbalanced in the painting. It would probably show up as it's upside down. You cease to look at it as a painting of ducks on a pond, and you start to see it as a bunch of shapes on a piece of paper. And you'll see, like what I'm putting in right now are the reflections at the bottom of the page because there was nothing at the bottom of the page. So these little reflections will help the eye go to that area and go around the picture. Instead of getting stuck in the dark areas and not going beyond the ducks, you will go to the little ripples and then back up. It's like a little breadcrumb bringing you around the picture. I keep adding, the value keeps lightening, so I need to go a couple of times over this to make it stay dark. I'm going to mix some cobalt with some Quinacridone burnt orange, and I'm just going to put in some more tree trunks and branches with a very thin brush. I'm actually painting upside down, but I turned the picture for you so you don't get annoyed. Just showing you I'm doing this upside down, but and that's pretty much how I do the last part of the painting. I don't really want to copy the photograph. I want to make it more balanced. Just tweak it. So here's the finished painting. I'm really liking it. Put a mat on it. Ta-da! I really hope you enjoyed this video and found it to be helpful. If you did, be sure to give me a thumbs up. Subscribe now to see more great videos. Thank you so much for watching and have a beautiful day.